Good morning, everybody. It's Marilyn Harris here of Hard at Work, and I'm here with your podcast about how to make an impactful legacy in your business. And today, my expert is Immanuel Joseph. He is a compassionate leader, and I'm going to let him tell you more about him and what he offers and how it all works. So I'm looking forward to the call. So welcome, Immanuel.
Thank you, Madeline, and really a pleasure to be here. And thank you for putting this together. Really appreciate that you're creating a place for people to share their wisdom conversations.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You're welcome. Actually, I was thinking about doing a podcast series probably a few weeks ago, and then I took a little course about how to do it. And so I went, because it's been so long, I haven't done this in a really long time. So, and technology changes. So, anyway, so here we are. So, I'm really going to keep it going for on a weekly basis. But the conference or the virtual kind of thing was just more of a way to pre-launch the conference series, and then we'll just I'll keep going with it on a weekly basis. But thank you for coming and willing to share your story. So tell me, I know a little bit about your story background, but maybe for our audience, you can tell us a little bit about how you got started doing what you're doing
Okay, wonderful. So I am a compassion evangelist. I run a company called Compassion Leaders. And what we do with compassion leaders is we train organizations and individuals to shift to a culture of compassion, to a mindset of compassion.
now.
And what I mean by that is a very practical approach to meeting challenges in a way that creates win-win for everybody. So my journey, though, it started off as being a cancer biologist, a cancer drug discovery scientist. And somewhere along the line, and I had a really fun life doing cancer drug discovery research, but along the way, there was that little bit of a thought inside, a deeper search for meaning, which led me to leave science behind and start taking care of people in the end of life situations. Um, but I also realized that was not me, because watching people suffer and pass away and going through suffering was not something that I was internally primed for. And that led me to ask myself certain hard questions and try to understand this idea of empathy and empathic distress and what I thought was compassion fatigue. And that led me to the compassion space, and that's how the whole journey started. I met some great mentors along the way who guided me to directing my efforts on being a compassion evangelist to workplaces, because workplaces have a lot of distress. There is a lot of suffering and anxiety,
Yeah.
stress, and depression. People are not performing to their full potential. And I realized that by making some small changes, if we can incorporate some basic changes in how we interface with the world, how we interface with ourselves, our life at work can be so much happier, so much more beautiful and meaningful and purposeful.
Mhm.
And so I created this training framework called the 9 pillars of workplace compassion. 9 simple life skills: self compassion, people first thinking, abundance mindset, mindfulness, embracing oneness and appreciating differences,
Mhm.
and being vulnerable appropriately, thinking big picture, and practicing gratitude on an everyday basis. These 9 pillars, and nothing new. I mean, these are things that we've always taught to act and be as our highest versions, but we forget that in the context of the workplace, that these have a space too. And so I kind of put them together in a format, in a way which makes it business friendly and organization friendly. And I've been taking these training programs, which we call as compassion hackathons and mini hackathons. And I know in the Bay Area, hacking is a cool word, but it's true, because what we're doing here is breaking into pre-existing notions about workplaces and breaking into the challenges, the human challenges of workplaces, and creating changes together. That's my journey. Um, that's what I do. I go to organizations, had some great feedback, and I think we are at a place where the world is beginning to recognize that there is a place for compassion in all aspects and all sphere of human activity, as His Holiness said. And I'm so glad to be in this space now.
Right, right. Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. The challenge is just changing one or two things that you're already doing, just shifting them a bit will make a big difference. And that's kind of what I just say is like, um, if you lead with, I say lead with kindness, but compassion is in kindness is in within compassion, but is also just changing a couple of little things in your business and implementing them, and you'll have a big difference. It doesn't take a big long percussion, unless you choose to say, I'm going to hire you and I'm going to have you do this, and then I want to start doing this, then that works as well. But usually just one or two things makes the big difference in an organization, like you were saying, and introducing the idea of compassion and empathy. And I think, to your point about that, there was a guy named Will Glennon, who's actually was the founder for the World Kindness USA. But he was just saying, as you were talking earlier about how you were hacking, and he says, well, we're kind of like the technology is shifting so fast. And then we have to now drop and say, okay, that's technology, but what about the people? So we have to go back to the people and help them to be empathetic and compassionate within the organization. So he just said, and that was so true. It's like he was giving his talk, and I'm going, oh my God, get to kindness. But really, he was just laying the groundwork to say why we need more kindness, why we need more empathy, and why we need more compassion. So I think what you just said is just so true. And it took you a journey to get there for yourself, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah, and your story about, when you were caregiving, that kind of like, oh my God, I became empathy burnout. And I thought there was an interesting way to describe caregiving, because, I've done that too, where I went too long and I was way beyond empathy, um, compassion. I didn't have any patience left for myself, never mind somebody else. So anyway, but I totally get what you're saying about the compassion in a business, and hacking it really just to kind of say, you know, how can we change our culture? What's going on? Because the technology plays such a big role, right? So that's just my viewpoint. We may not see that way. So what are some of the bigger challenges that you're finding the companies that you're speaking to? What are some of the things that you run across or that they share with you that their challenges are?
I mean, one of my mentors told me this once. If more than one person is in the room, there is already suffering there. And so I like to think suffering is rampant, and it comes in many, many forms, right? In fact, I was trying to kind of create an A to Z list of challenges in workplaces, from bias to bullying, to people, being nepotistic sometimes, or people opting from a place of ego, just not having the right kind of servantly skills to actually lead organizations. So there's a whole ton of issues that come up. Um, but to give a simple example, right? The lack of appreciation in workplaces, the lack of gratitude that's there. There is this mindset of I deserve to be treated in a certain way, and I don't have to give back. That entitlement mindset is a major issue among, and again, this is from a few companies I've worked with. They say it's not just a millennial thing. It's kind of seeping into our context in a lot of ways. Um, but to step back and say each one of us needs to be appreciated and valued for us to be our best and bring our best. That's such a simple thing, but
Right.
people are looking for mental permissions or leadership permissions for something like that to happen. And so A quick example was when I was working with a company and sharing with them about compassion skills and the nine pillars of compassion. At the end of the day, we said, okay, the challenge here is a lack of appreciation. How
Mhm.
can we do this, and how can we change this? And so what we did, there were 16 people in the group. Each person decided to write 15 letters of or 15 emails every
Mhm.
single day of appreciation to the other 15 in the group, and they would receive in turn 15 emails, just one liners saying how much valued they are in the workplace.
Right.
A couple of weeks later, the owner of the organization writes to me and says, it was a small business, writes to me and says, I don't know what magic happened, but I feel like I'm working in a completely different workplace. Right? So small adjustments, small shifts, so it can completely change the world around. But
Mhm.
I think as far as the gamut of challenges go, uh, it's as diverse and as broad as human nature itself, I think.
Yeah.
Um, but I think also, to answer your question from a different angle, I think the challenge with taking compassion programs to organizations, right, the restrictions or the limitations that we see is that people don't understand what compassion is.
Mhm.
Some people call it as weakness. People say, I can't afford to be weak by being compassionate. People will take advantage of me.
Mhm.
And there are people who say that's a religious experience. None of those are true. I mean, compassion is a human experience,
Mhm.
and compassion is about being powerful, coming from a place of strength. And so those are the other. That's another level of blocks that we need to overcome
Mhm.
before people start thinking about the human approach to workplaces.
Sorry. There you go. Sorry about that. I usually have it on the timer on mute. But anyway, I'm
No
sorry.
worries.
Go ahead. So yeah, I like what you're saying is because there are those answers that come back even on the kindness front of things. It's like, well, people take advantage of me. I can't be kind because, I don't want them to railroad me, or, I run a production facility. How can I possibly be compassionate toward anybody else in my business? So I totally get that. Some of those are some of the things that you probably run into when you're speaking to people. Yeah,
Totally, totally.
yeah. And so, what are some of your great successes you've experienced already?
I like to think any human being who has some way shifted because of our interaction is
Hmm.
a success. And I think, at least from the perspective of the people who have undergone that transformation or that transition,
Right.
um, that is I think I think it's such a beautiful thing when I see people come back to me 3 years later and say, you know what, at that time it did not make sense, but 3 years later I was going through a job transfer, I'm sorry, I was going through a layoff, and I was totally down. And I remembered some of the teachings about self compassion, and I was able to put it in practice. And I came from a place of power when I went into my next interview. So I hear these conversations all the time. So those are some really great successes. But from an organizational perspective, I think there was one particular example that stands out to me, and there was this group, this doctors group setting, which brought me in to teach compassion. And um, the end goal was to change the outcomes for the patients, the patient satisfaction,
Right.
but also create an internal setting of happiness and collaboration. um, Initially there was so much resistance that they didn't want to talk about anything because everything was perfect according to them. And it turned out that ultimately the person who brought me in, the leader of the group, was actually the one who was creating the toxic environment. But as soon as the realization came and she started shifting, and I know she's okay with me sharing this, so because we have talked about this before.
Yeah.
But what did happen was, when she realized that the challenge was her coming in the way of her being her best self, she became a light for everybody else to shine and said, you know what, this is my vulnerable moment. I'm opening up to you. I'm sorry that these are the expectations and that I did not meet. And let's move forward with a certain level of um, of camaraderie, and that completely shifted the organization too.
Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It'd be a surprise how many people are, in the leadership role that don't think they're a problem, but they they tend to be, but not always. But anyway, yeah. So great. So what kind of clients do you really like to work with? You sound like you work with a wide variety of people. So who are your favorite type of people you like to work
That's the beauty. I think that's the beautiful thing. Compassion has no restrictions on the industry
with? Right.
or the size of the company.
Yeah.
I've worked with teams from Salesforce, I've worked with dental offices, and I have found that just as suffering is universal, the need for compassion and the application of compassion is also universal.
Right.
What we are trying to do now is trying to get our message to as many groups and as many industries as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Group sizes from, when we do a small setting, it's usually about 12 to 20 people,
Mm-hmm.
and a maximum of, I think, about 25 people so far, but in one group when we do these hackathon events.
Right.
But when we do our shorter events, they are much bigger. We have 2-hour compassion hackathons and all that. But ultimately, I feel that irrespective of industry and setting, we can make a human difference, and they can become evangelists of compassion in their own space, which is ultimately our goal, that they become self-sustaining and become lights in their own little spaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we still have people that, certain people we like to really work with. And so those are the people probably are who willing to make that shift, right? Or seeking out that shift. Who can I call to help me make this shift in my organization, right? So it doesn't matter really, like you were saying about industry and all that other thing. It could be anybody, any business. But there's always a group of people that we like to work with that we find that we enjoy the most, that kind of thing. So it's just something to think about. So I hear that you provide, sounds like you provide a lot of workshops and things like that. Is that how you mostly work, or do you do, uh, so yeah, so how do you do just your workshops?
So when we work with companies, we work with teams.
Hmm.
When we work with small teams, it's about, again, like I said, 12 to at the maximum of 25 to 30 people. We do what we call as compassion hackathons, because the idea of a hackathon um, is we help people should co-create the solutions. I can go and I can teach people a few concepts and ideas. People will be motivated, inspired, and they will hold it in their brains for a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, and then it disappears. But when they are the ones who are creating solutions for their own problems, they identify as a group and they take ownership of that. They have created solution machines. Everybody has the buy-in, and so that's what those are the formats that our workshops operate, by helping people co-create solutions for their own unique problems.
Right.
But I'm also a coach. I'm a certified coach, and I use the 9 pillars of compassion training framework
Okay.
to help people, because the idea there is, if you change from within, you
Hmm.
change the world outside.
Right.
You are the change that the world needs to see.
Right.
So the transformation, and that's again so broad, in the sense that you can talk to a person and identify anything from a personal issue, a person going through a divorce or a loss, to a person who is struggling to move up the ladder in the workplace because of a leadership issue or a relationship issue in the workplace. Any of those you can address using this idea of compassion, because when you start being self-compassionate, which is the foundation of any compassion practice, when you start becoming self-compassionate, you put yourself in a place of great power and great strength and great authenticity. And from there, as you have rooted out, you expand, and you show your full magnificence. So that's how it goes. So workshops, coaching, and consulting, that's how I try to make my impact on the world.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. I like how you're calling them the hackathons. It's pretty cool. But coming back from your kind of technology background, I guess that would describe it perfectly. No, I totally agree. It's just that, like you're saying, you can implement and talk to them, but if they don't have a part in it, they, like you say, it disappears. It's like you weren't even there. So anyway, so can you share a couple of tips with us? And maybe you said you had a special offer that you want to offer the audience today, so you can share that as well.
Absolutely. So, a couple of tips. Like I said, self compassion is the foundation of all compassion practices.
Hmm.
And Dr. Kristen Neff, who's the leader in the space of self compassion, calls this as being a good friend to yourself, right?
Hmm.
So, I would like to think, create self compassion practice that goes with you every day. And I remember one of my friends, her name is Santa Linda. She shared this little technique with me, which I practice on myself now, and it really helps. See, I mean, I realize only when I start thinking about this how critical I am about myself, right? So, her practice goes like this: she stands in front of the mirror, and looks at the reflection and points a finger at the reflection and says, you are so ugly, you're so old, you're saggy, you're not good for anything. And she tells all her uh, negative thoughts are directed at the reflection on the mirror, and then she turns a finger around and points to herself and says, but you, on the other hand, you're perfect, you're beautiful, you are as great as you can be for today, and you are in the perfect place. You're going to go out and make a difference in the world. So I think that kind of a separation,
Hmm.
it kind of seems whimsical in the beginning, but when you start practicing it, it kind of becomes a fun routine to practice. So that's one great idea to do. But also to remember, I think the other great practice to remember is gratitude.
Hmm.
Um, we often forget that there is so much to be thankful for if
Hmm.
only we choose to
Right.
look at what we have. Most of the times we have this idea of looking back and saying, oh, I was so lucky to have that, and we need to let go of that bias and actively practice gratitude in everyday living. I think that completely shifts our perspective. So
Right.
a simple habit of going to bed by being thankful for three things. I think that completely shifts our practice as well. Mindfulness,
Hmm.
which is creating a space for making choices.
Right.
I think the best way to think of mindfulness is between the stimulus and the response is a space, and that space lies our choice, and that choice lies our freedom. That's from Viktor Frankl, from Man's Search for Meaning. And that's basically what mindfulness is, to create that space between the stimulus and the response and use that space to create a compassionate response.
Right.
These are
Right.
some few ideas. And to as for the giveaway, I am working on a book called The Fifth Revolution, which is going to be released in September.
Hmm.
And this book essentially, I'm hoping, will make compassion skills and tools available for anyone
Hmm.
everywhere. It's everything that I've been teaching put together in a way that is digestible and it's full of stories from people all over, real life stories. People
Right.
from all across have shared their perspectives and stories, and it's centered around the nine pillars. And I would love to give that away. And I can share more information about the book
Sure.
when we set up a page. I can
Yeah.
set up a link to the book because there's a website associated with that.
Hmm.
But when the book comes out, I would love to be able to share that with the right people who are interested.
Right. Right. Yeah. And absolutely, we can have you on another time, and you can share about your book, in September when it comes out. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you,
Yeah. So
Marilyn.
anything
Yeah.
you want to say? You've shared a lot of really great information, Emmanuel. So is there anything else you want to say before we end this call today?
No, I want to say is thank you for having me on, and I really appreciate that you have initiated these conversations, and you're bringing people together. I think the time is ripe. Um, I think we are at a point where we are realizing that beyond the machine age that we have gotten into with the fourth industrial revolution, we tap into our own consciousness, into our own heart, and realize that the true universe, the power of everything that's past and present and future,
Mhm.
is inside us. And so
Yeah.
I appreciate that you are creating these wisdom conversations and bringing people together on that topic. So thank you.
You're welcome. I think it's so important. Like you're saying, the timing is right. And I think people are ready for solutions or something different to happen. You know, you're right on too. So I so appreciate coming on to this call. But thank you everyone for joining us today. And we'll be chatting with all of you very soon. And yeah, so take care and make sure you come back and visit us soon. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye bye.